Hi guys, my name is Shay and I'm going to be showing you a step-by-step demonstration of the task required to migrate a subset of schemas from an on-prem server to our Amazon RDS. So right now I'm logged into the on-prem server and I'm just going to check to see if the database is currently running. So I'm going to run this command to list all the databases running on the server. And the database I want is running Stack SQL. I'm just going to set my environment. Make sure it's pointing to the Stack SQL database. Okay, so now I'm going to log into that database. And I'm going to list all the schemas that I want to basically export to AWS RDS. And these are all the schemas in there, and it's basically all the schemas that start with the stock August 19, and I put the that sign to list all of it. So I see that the schemas are in there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a parameter file that is going to be used to export all the schemas. I'm going to exit from the database and I'm going to have to create a parameter file. So I'm going to do that in this script folder. I'm going to clear that and create a parameter. And I'm going to name that parameter file expdp stack SQL and then my name.par. And the content of that parameter file will be this. And it's going to list the dump file name and the log file for that par file that I'm creating. I'm going to save that. So now that I've created the parameter file, I'm going to run a command to do a backup. I'm going to basically do a backup to export the schemas into a par file. And that command is this. And that's the par file that I just created, and that's the command to run a backup of that par file. So once this command runs, it's going to create a dump file in my data pump folder. I'm just going to let this run to create the backup file. Now that that has run, you can see that the dump file was created in the backup data pump folder, Stack SQL folder. And that dump contains all the schemas that I want to export from this server to the AWS RDS. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a bucket in our AWS account that is going to, where we're going to export this dump file into. So I'm going to go to the console to create that bucket. It's going to be in the region US East. You can always create it in any region you want. So now that bucket has been created. So now that the bucket has been created, we're going to go back to the on-prem server and we're going to copy that dump file that we had created that contains the schemas and then move it into the S3 bucket that we just created. Okay. So we're going to copy the dump file from the server to the bucket that we just created. And the command for that is this, is the AWS S3 copy from the folder that contains the dump file to the S3 bucket that we just created. As you can see, it was successfully copied over, and we can always just confirm. And there you see that the dump file is in the S3. So now that we have copied the dump file from the server to the S3 bucket that we created in our AWS account, we're going to go to the console and go and create our staging server from an AMI that we had initially created. And I'm just going to go into my AWS console, and this was the AMI that we had created that contains the Oracle database. So we're just going to launch an instance from this AMI. Okay, I'm just going to select this. We're going to leave all the defaults. Select security groups that allows access from the ports listed. And I'm just going to launch it. So now the instance is being created from the AMI that contains the Oracle installation. So now our staging instance is up and running. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into that instance and then try to move the path file that we stored in the S3 bucket into this instance, and in preparation to move it to the RDS database. So I'm going to log into that instance now. I'm using Porty. I'm going to copy the public address, and then we're going to go on Porty to log into that instance. Just going to load it in here, and as you can see, that's the public IP address of that instance we just created. So I'm going to log into it. It's taking a little time to load up. There we go. So now the first thing I'm going to do is to check if there are any databases running on this server. Probably not, since we just created it. And there's nothing. So I'm going to check the databases that were in the AMI that we used to launch this instance. I'm just going to run to check the database name. And there's one database in there, and that's the name. So we're going to point our Oracle environment to that database name. That's it. Just point it there. So, but since it's not up and running, so we're going to have to start that data, log into that database to start it up. Okay. The database is opening now. So I'm going to mention now that this staging server is, since it's a real server, it doesn't automatically come with a Python installation. So the next thing we're going to do after opening the database, okay, now it's open. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install Python on this instance. So let's just, So we're going to log in as root to run that installation. And the first command we're going to run is this. Okay. So the next command we're going to run is, and it looks like because we launched this instance from an existing AMI, some of the dependencies have already been resolved and already exist in the instance. So we probably don't need to run it, but if it's a brand new instance, you probably need to make sure you run those commands just to make sure that you install Python on your instance. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to create folders on this server that would where we are going to move the dump files from the S3 bucket into. So the dump files are going to come from the S3 bucket that they were currently storing them in, and we're going to move them to the staging server, but we need to create folders where they're going to exist. So to do that, we're going to first log in as root and then create the folders. We're going to create folders. And then what we're going to do is we're also going to change, make sure that those folders are owned by Oracle. And then also change the permissions. I'll modify the permissions on there. So now the folders have been created. So the next thing, like I mentioned, is that we're going to have to copy that dump file from the S3 bucket into the folder we just created. So we'll run this command to do the copy. And right now it's in there, and just to confirm, go into that folder to confirm that it's been downloaded from that bucket, and you see it's right there. So at this point, what we've done so far is we intended to move certain schemas from an on-prem server to an RDS instance in an AWS account. And what we did is we created a dump file on the on-prem server and exported that into an S3 bucket. And then we now created an instance from an AMI image that we previously had. We launched an instance from that AMI image that will act as a staging server. And with this staging server, we're going to create a database link from between this staging server and an RDS instance that will be storing the data. And that staging server currently, we now moved the dump file from the S3 bucket into the staging server, which we just finished just now. So if you do not have an RDS instance, I'm just going to create one real quick where that RDS instance is where the data is going to be stored. And basically we're going to push the dump file from this staging server into the RDS instance. So now we're just going to switch over to the console again to create that RDS instance. So real quick, we're just going to try and create one real quick, and I'm going to click on create database. We're going to create an Oracle database. Leave it as Oracle Enterprise Edition. We're going to pick the Oracle 12.1, and it has, I believe, a free tier template that we're going to select. Scroll down, we're going to name the instance prod for production. Leave the username as admin. You can type in your master password for your admin user. And okay, we're gonna leave this as default. Over here, we're gonna leave all of this as default. Leave this section to as default. Let me just see what's in here. Okay, this is the subnet group. We're going to select yes for the publicly accessible, because you want it to be able to be accessed publicly. And we're going to leave it as the default VPC. And right now, I'm going to select this. I remove the defaults because this gives access to all the ports. We're going to leave that AZ, and the port as 1521. And just making sure we're not missing out anything. Let's check what is under here. Okay, so the initial database name, we're going to name it RDS. Leave this as default, leave this as default. We're going to remove automatic backup. We don't need the encryption. We don't need that insight. And no preference. So I think that's it. So I'm just going to click on the create database. And usually it takes about 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video and we'll come back once it's created. So finally, our database is up and running. And now that it's up and running, what we're going to do is we're going to need to copy the endpoint. And with this endpoint, we're going to have to go create a network entry in the RDS instance. A network entry for the RDS instance in the Oracle Net directory on the staging server. So with this endpoint, we're going to now go into the staging server and go to the, just exit to the Oracle user. And then go to the TNS names.aura folder. File, So now we're going to VI into that for file. And we're going to put in the entry for the RDS instance we just created. And as you can see, that's the RDS, an entry for the RDS, and this is the endpoint that we copied after creating the RDS instance. So once we've done this, we're now going to try to ping that RDS instance from the staging server. So to do that, we're just going to run this command. And as you can see, we were successful in pinging it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a database link from within the Oracle database on the staging server to the RDS instance we just created. And to do that, we're going to log into the database. We're just going to confirm the environment is still there. Okay. The command to run that create database link is create database link RDS. That's the name of the link, and connect to the RDS instance with username admin identified by a password. using RDS. And the database link has been created. To test to make sure that the link works, we're just going to run this command. And this is just to confirm that we have the working link between both instances. So this is for the staging server, and now we're going to run one for the RDS instance. Great, the database link works. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a data pump logical directory within the staging database. And then we're going to use the DBMS file transfer package to transfer the files from the Oracle staging server to the RDS instance. And the command to create that data pump logical directory is the create or replace directory data pump dir as backup. So this was the folder that we created. The directory we created with, that contains the dump file. So that directory has been created. Now the next command after creating that would is going to be the DBMS file transfer package that will transfer the files from the Oracle staging server to the RDS instance. And the package command is and there we go, the PLSQL procedure successfully completed. So I'm just going to clear the screen so we can see the screen better. So the next step would be to confirm that the files that we just moved to our, from the staging server to the RDS instance actually exist in the RDS instance. So I'm going to connect. So we already have a database link. So I'm just going to connect to RDS instance. It's asking for the password to that instance. So now I'm connected, and the command to check if the table exists will be select all from table RDS admin, this folder, data pump dir order by m time. So let's see if it exists, and there you go. That's the dump file. Now that the file has been transferred, let's check for the required table space for the data import to be successful, because we have to move the data now into the RDS instance. I want to make sure that it has all the table space for all the data to lie in. So the command to check the table space would be this. Select table space name from DBA table spaces where table space name like users or equal to users. And there the table space exists. Now we'll run a script to create the users. And basically the script basically creates each user in a default table space called users that we just confirmed exists. And it's also going to grant us access privileges. I'll just show you an example of what the script will look like. One of the users we're going to be creating that exists in the schemas that we try to export from the on-prem server. So that's one of the users. If you remember, it was stack underscore August 19 underscore, and then we had the percentage sign. So that's one of the users. So we're just going to create that user created, and we're going to grant that user certain privileges, access privileges. So I'm sorry. Granted. So this basically will be what the script will contain all the users and be able to grant all of this access. So I'm just going to run the script. There's a bunch of users in that, a bunch of schemas. So I'm going to run the script, and everything was successful. And now that that's been done, we're just going to import the data into the Oracle RDS database from the staging server. And let me just clear my screen one more time. To import the data, I'm going to exit from the database, and I'm going to run this command. The Oracle home being IMPD, and then the credentials of the RDS instance, the DOM file name, and the schemas that we're importing into the RDS instance. So I'm going to run this command now. So it's importing all the schemas into the RDS instance. And completed. So now all of the schemas are imported into the RDS instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use SQL developer to connect to that instance and see if the schemas are currently in there. Now we're going to log into SQL developer and put in the credentials for the RDS instance. The database name is prod. The username, we're going to enter it. The local host is the endpoint that we copied from the RDS. So let's get that. So we'll go copy the endpoint value from the RDS instance and paste that under the host name. The port remains the same and the SID is RDS. And we're going to test that to see if it works. Success. And now we're going to connect, and as you can see on the left side, the database, we're connected to the database. Now to check if the schemas that we imported from the on-prem server actually crossed over to the AWS account, the RDS instance. Still loading. So we're going to expand this to see if the schemas exist in there. The computer is a little slow today, so let's see. We'll go under the users, and there you go. That's all the schemas that were on in the on-prem server that has crossed over to the AWS account. So we're successful in transferring all the schemas. And so before I go, I'm going to show you a quick script that I created that actually allows you automate the transfer or the migration of a schema from the on-prem server to this AWS account on the cloud, in the cloud. So I'm just going to show you real quick that script I wrote. So to test out the script, I'm going to delete one of the schemas that we just imported into this RDS instance. So I'm just going to pick any one of them. I'm going to pick this one, the OBA, and I'm going to drop that user. And it says it's been dropped, and we're just going to refresh to confirm. We don't have that schema, the OBA, listed in the database anymore, in the instance anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also show you the bucket that we're going to be using is the stack Sheyi migration, and I'm just going to refresh that to make sure there's nothing in the bucket. And now I'm going to go to the on-prem server. I'm logged into the on-prem server now. So I'm going to cd into the script folder where my scripts are located. And I'm going to now run the script. This script actually does a lot of things, but I'm only going to be showing you the part that is related to the data migration that we just did. So in this case, I'm going to select option 4 for data migration. It's asking me for my name, and what it does with this is it actually attaches your name to some of the files that it creates. I'm going to choose a random name. Let's just pick Kemi. It lists all the databases in the server. In this case, there's just one database, Stack SQL. So I'm going to select one for that database. And from that database, it now lists all the schemas that are currently in that database. In this case, there are 26 schemas, but the only one we need is the last one because we deleted the schema that ended with OBA. So we're going to select 26 to select that schema. So what it's doing right now is it's creating a dump file from the schema that we just selected, and it's going to store that dump file in a folder on the on-prem server, and eventually take this folder from the on-prem server and then export it to the S3 bucket like we did earlier. But in this case, everything is scripted. As you can see, created a path file sp expdp stack SQL underscore Kemi. He attaches your name to that path file. So it's going to run for a few seconds more. And then it shows you where the dump file is located in the backup data pump SQL folder. So right now it's asking me for the profile name of the AWS account. I'm going to be exporting this dump file to my profile name. It's asking me if I want to migrate this dump file to a bucket that is currently existing, or if I want to create a new one. I'll just select one that exists and enter option 1. So it's listing all the buckets, and in this case I'm going to select this stack Sheyi migration. I'm going to show you that bucket again so you can see that it's currently empty. I'm going to refresh that, this stack Sheyi migration. So we're going to select bucket 13. And so what it does is it grabs the dump file that it just created and exports it to that S3 bucket. And he also just confirms that by listing all the files in the bucket, and you can see that. We can just quickly take a look at it, and I refresh it and you see the dump file exists there now. So now he's asking me to enter the password of the RDS server, the instance that we created. I'm going to enter that password, and it's going to use a key pair that is stored on the on-prem server to authenticate the you're connecting to the staging server. I'm going to click yes. And what it's doing right now is he exported certain files that contain values to parameters that the staging server needs. So if you look at up here, you see he exported certain files, and those files went to the staging server. Those files contain values for parameters. And then it says we're now logged into the staging server and setting the Oracle environment. It's also making sure that the Oracle database is currently running, and it installs Python if Python doesn't exist on that server, and it creates a directory for the data pump for the file where the file is going to be moved from the S3 bucket into. It creates that directory. It copies the dump files from the S3 bucket into that directory you just created, and then it also deletes it from the bucket because you don't really need it anymore. It downloads that dump file now, and okay, this is where it downloads from the bucket basically into the folder that you created, and then it deletes it. And now it transfers that dump file from the staging server to the RDS instance. Remember that we already gave the script the password to the RDS instance, so it's able to now create a database link and then send that dump file to the RDS instance, and then it gives you a confirmation that the dump file has been transferred and the schema imported. So let's just check a few things. We're going to check the bucket to make sure it really did delete it. I'm going to refresh it, and as you see, it deleted it right after moving it to the staging server. And then we're also going to go to our SQL database developer and refresh the screen. Let me just do a quick refresh. So it's reloading right now. Let's just confirm. And there we go. The schema has been imported back with the script. I hope I was able to teach you a thing or two with this video, and hopefully I can do a lot more, and see you soon. Thank you. Bye.